Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the transfiguration in the Bible when Jesus takes James, Peter, and John to the mountaintop where Moses and Elijah appear, which can symbolize a stairway to heaven. Listen as we examine John 1:4. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. End of the verse. In this show, we will explore the stages in development necessary to travel from sense to soul and why it can be represented by a circle. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and reflect the divine image and likeness. So, the title of today's show is Joining Truth with Spirit Brings Light. Sounds like some instruction there. Lots for us to know about. Let's get started.
Yeah, I'm inspired to do this show by the transfiguration, which appears in the Bible, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but not in John. And I really like the reason why Herb Fitch gave us this information, because the book of John begins with the transfiguration and represents the continuation of the developmental process after the recognition of divine omnipresence. There's a lot of preparatory work involved in cultivating a consciousness from sense to soul. And today we're going to look back to October 24th, 2022, because on October 25th, 2022, there was a solar eclipse in Scorpio, 2 degrees. And we did a radio show that aired on October 24th, titled Uncovering the Light of Eternal Life. In that show, we went over the transfiguration and the symbolism that is found in Jesus taking James, Peter, and John to the mountaintop where Moses and Elijah appear. And in that radio show, we explained a lot of what Herb Fitch had to say about the transfiguration, and then we incorporated what we understand about Kriya Yoga and how they overlap and complement each other. In today's show, I'd like to revisit the symbolism of the transfiguration and do again the substituting of Jesus, James, Peter, John, and the mountaintop with principle, soul, life, love, and mind, and then Moses and Elijah with truth and spirit. We can create a working template to graduate from mental material to spiritual awareness. All of this will come under the heading of what Mary Baker Eddy calls educating thought up to spiritual apprehension. And as any gardener would tell you, it is best to treat and prepare the soil before planting. In this model, we are preparing consciousness for the birth of Christ.
So let's start first by connecting the dots between James, Peter, and John and the words that you were talking about before, the principle, soul, life, love, etc. Can you get us started with that?
Yeah, in order to hold this whole thing together, we have to have a template. We use the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle. when you set the zodiac up in that fashion. The planets that rule the signs and are associated with the chakras are in alignment with the zodiacal signs they rule. And so when you look at Saturn, which is at the root center in the diagram, Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. Now, what happens here is these are symbols. Symbols are much greater than equal to something. So it opens up into the 10th and 11th house in astrology. Houses in astrology are departments in life. So what we're doing is we're taking something that is thousands and thousands of miles away, and we're giving it association with a system in a physical body, a location in a physical body. It doesn't equal it, but it is a symbol for it. And once you begin to understand that the physical body that's on the earth is a reflection of the divine body or the astral body which appears in the heavens, then you can get a better mental landscape that will support the divine principle, because the divine principle is one. And here on earth, we're experiencing the many. In order to have a way of understanding how that's working, you can use all of this information to create this mental staircase that will lead consciousness from mental material to spiritual. And it will coincide with the scriptural command to rise, because divine mind is before thought and above corporeal sense. So paint this picture, something you can grab onto at a mental level that will enable you to rise out of the belief in a finite form on earth and have an identity with an astral image, which is seemingly in the heavens. And of course, we know this entire human experience, this mental material universe, isn't real. It is an appearance, an illusion, a hypnotic state. But we can use it as the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness, because without it, there's no way of knowing what we are conscious of. And so here we're going to use symbols. So we take James, Peter, John, Jesus, and then of course we open it up, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus. Then identify it with something in your physical form or some characteristic. Then we can take it from an outer event that took place 2,000 years ago to something here and now, which will be specifically designed to get us beyond here and now into an astral image and then eventually spiritual identity, which is everywhere, always.
So we may have some listeners that have read the Transfiguration in the Bible and listening to the information that we're giving them now for the first time, maybe having a hard time making the connection. Can you help us with that?
Well, rather than me redoing the show we did on October 24th, 2022, titled Uncovering the Light of Eternal Life, I would suggest go on the website, click either the radio show or Blog Talk Radio Show buttons. It will bring you to the radio show catalog page. And on that page, you can either do a search or scroll down, look for the date, October 24th, 2022. And if you listen to that show, we go into more detail as far as the representation that we're talking about. In today's show, we want to take it from 2,000 years ago to an inner event now.
You had mentioned earlier about the solar eclipse, October 25th, 2022. Let's talk more about what that means for us today.
Again, we use the astrology. Astrology is a really great symbol for the logic, order, predictability, dependability of the divine creative principle. You're working with something that's visible and tangible. Astrological events are predictable. We know where the planets are going to be 2,000 years from now. This gives us hope. The divine creative principle is functioning. And now what we want to do is lift our identity up into that larger sense of self, because accepting and living in the knowledge of the infinite divine self takes care of what seems to be a finite mortal being on the planet. And so using astrological events like an eclipse, when you plot a solar eclipse in an ephemeris, it is on a 2-year, 2-month, and 28-day cycle, which means if you look for the phases of the moon in aspect to that eclipse point, happened on October 25th, 2022, 2 degrees Scorpio, the new moon. The first quarter phase of that eclipse point happened on July 25th, 2023. The full moon phase happened on April 23rd, 2024, and the third quarter phase, which is the final phase of the moon, will happen on January 21st, 2025. If you have a journal, it is helpful to plot the progression and begin to see the coincidences being presented to help us plot the course in consciousness. We can use this almost exactly like the ancients used the stars for celestial navigation and how to get around on the planet. We use the celestial positioning system of individual consciousness in the same way.
So, Swami, you're saying the third quarter phase that's going to be on January 21st, 2025, should that be symbolizing for us we should be having some growth in consciousness or degree of awareness?
Well, I think what we can do is we can use this to determine whether we are growing psychologically and spiritually. One of the things we are working with here would be, say, for example, the idea of Saturn and the idea of a principle. And then you put it in the context of a cycle. That's why in the opening we said the cycle can be represented by a circle, because spirit is not in time. Spirit is happening everywhere, always. So rather than being linear, where you're going from October 25th, 2022 to January 21st, 2025, which seems like there's here and there, now and then, to see if you are progressing spiritually is you're starting to see the everywhere, always. Where you started out is where you wind up. We don't make ourselves spiritual. We come out of this limited sense of self in time and space, which is, like we say, it is represented by a progression where thought is shifting from mental material to eventually a spiritual basis, which means we are changing how we're thinking. We are changing our perception of things. And the way we would measure this, as we start to grow physically, mentally, we're starting to see the more things change, the more they remain the same. Am I becoming who I always am? Perfect, whole, and complete.
We're going to pause that here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So you had mentioned earlier about there being preparatory work that's involved in cultivating this consciousness to go from sense to soul. What does that look like when we're doing it? And even better yet, how do we do it?
Yeah, first of all, what I like to do is establish why it is necessary. Because an important point in the transfiguration for me is before Moses and Elijah appear, Jesus must take James, Peter, and John to the mountaintop. So to me, this is representation for the prerequisite before the joining of truth with spirit. And we have to understand things like when Jesus was on the planet, Mary and Joseph were Essenes, and the Essenes were very spiritual people. And purification was a huge part of their everyday life. Their idea of going to the woods and preparing the way for the Lord was fasting. And I'm not just talking about limiting the amount of television I'm going to watch or how much time I'm going to spend on my phone. We're talking about purifying ourselves physically and mentally. Getting rid of all of our unnecessary dependencies so that we can create a hospitable environment to invite the invisible, intangible, divine perfection of being into our awareness. Without developing this acute sensitivity, there's no way of us being able to be receptive to what is invisible and intangible. The divine spiritual light. So, yeah, there's a lot of preparatory work that has to be in place. And again, one of the reasons why we stay with the Kriya Yoga that we teach is because it's already in the format. Purification is right there, physically, mentally, conceptually. And we need this path of knowledge. We must have a mental landscape that can support the divine idea. Without having these things in place, it's like going out to drive somewhere without a map. And when we're left to our own devices, everything is left to chance. And I love what Einstein said, God doesn't play dice. And so it becomes very important for us to be able to unbox this idea of Jesus taking James, Peter, and John to the mountaintop, taking it from something that happened 2,000 years ago to something that must be done right here, right now, in order for me to actualize this birth of Christ in consciousness. And here is what we are required to do in order to evoke this God experience. So there is a prerequisite before the joining of truth with spirit. Using the stairway to heaven as our map. We can begin at Muladhara Chakra or Ephesus or Principle, which for me are all symbolized by Jesus, or better yet, the Christ.
So Swami, you said there's a prerequisite before joining of truth with spirit using the stairway. We to assume that Muladhara Chakra, that's our first chakra, the root chakra. Are you saying that we need to go to each chakra in progression And then hopefully at the end, we'll be able to experience this joining of truth and spirit.
Right. And the reason why we start at Muladhara Chakra and we assign that to the Christ is because we need a principle. If you do not have a principle, then what you're doing will have no power. So to understand the divine principle, we really have to understand this idea of oneness, one being, one life. We also have to understand the power of this one life is eternal life. It's changeless. It's perfect. It's perfect life everywhere, always. When you have a principle, then the rest of it starts to stack up. Then we would go to Jupiter Chakra, the navel center, symbolized by Svadhisthana Chakra in yoga. That would be Smyrna in Revelations in the Bible. And we're going to assign that to James. The Mary Baker Eddy word for this is soul. Soul is a representation for self-existent eternal life. Jupiter is associated with space, the expansive principle of the universe. Space is measured in here and there, but spirit is not in space. Spirit is everywhere, always. So a big part of doing what we would call separating the tares from the wheat, separating what seems to be under material law, what seems to be under the influence of two powers, which is changing, must be separated from that which is changeless, perfect, and whole. And a big part of this is developing a path of knowledge. And like I keep saying, if you work with this template and you fill it in with the right information, this was all part of what Mary Baker Eddy said. Mortal thought does not at once catch the higher meaning and can do so only as thought is educated up to spiritual apprehension. And so in Kriya Yoga, we have a path of knowledge that's in place. And a big part of that now is cataloging this information in a way that it is readily available and at the same time included in a daily practice so that you're not just fumbling through the studio of your mind trying to figure out where am I, what am I doing, where am I going. You have not only external signposts and indicators of where you quote unquote should be, but then also you have a way of evaluating what's going on in your inner environment and using the shape, composition, condition of your physical body to give you clues as to what you're conscious of. Because we can't be conscious of the perfection of being and be out picturing sickness, suffering, disease, lack, or limitation. So we have to make these inner adjustments.
So if we make these inner adjustments as we're moving up this stairway to heaven, when we get to the top, when we want to join truth with spirit, what does that mean? What does that word joining mean in this particular model?
To demonstrate divine law, one needs to understand the operations of the divine principle and application therefrom. This is what Mary Baker Eddy told us. So we must know the power of divine is one, absolute oneness. And we experience this oneness by judging righteously, by translating everything back to the one. The idea of going twain or turning from the mortal sense of the many and being a faithful witness to the one, the truth, and not the lie. And to do this, purify, purify, purify. Don't be tempted to accept or believe the corporeal senses ever. The mortal mind is the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness. If we don't see God everywhere, we don't see God anywhere. And by not being conscious of the omnipresence, we violate the divine law of one and fall back under the karmic law and the belief in two powers under the spell of mortal mind, world mind. And so a big part of being able to evaluate where am I is using what is surrounding you, using also information that you are acquiring, and then testing your information. Then there is this graduation. There is this turning that happens where we stop thinking with the five corporeal senses and we start knowing with seven spiritual senses. That's why there's James, Peter, John, Jesus, the mountain, Moses, and Elijah. There are seven of them. 7 thought windows. And we have to master the mind-body complex before we can walk reason through this open door of revelation.
So I think most of us think of a stairway or staircase as being a linear type of an object, but in the beginning, we had said that it could be circular. Can you maybe explain that for us?
Yeah, have you ever heard of such a thing as a spiral staircase? It's more like that, where we are going not just in a straight shot upward, but we are circling in a progressive direction, almost like a corkscrew motion. But the process is symbolized by a circle because we end up where we began. Spirit is all. Spirit is one and changeless. We don't make ourselves spirit. We come out of the belief in matter. And I have something here from John 15:4-5, and I'll read it. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except ye abide in me. I am the vine, and ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me, ye can do nothing. End of quote. Trying to understand this idea of oneness, and in the context of the many. And I really like what C.S. Lewis said to explain this. He never thought Hamlet could know Shakespeare. And in that same way, he never thought he could have a personal relationship with God. God is divine mind. And this idea of principle and idea, we are merely a thought in the divine mind. We are a reflection, is what Mary Baker Eddy called it, which can be interpreted by reflection is divine mind, considering its own content. And so for us to have this revelation, there is this two-part authentication that takes place, where we as the idea are conscious of the divine omnipresence, and at the same time, the divine mind acknowledges itself as you.
That completes our show for today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, as you scroll down, you'll see buttons there that you could press that could further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and reflect the divine image and likeness. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.